What's up guys, and it is a new day. We got the head back from the machine shop. We did all kinds of good goodies in here. We got the new valve springs. They did new valve seals underneath the head. Get a good shot of that. They basically put in new valve seats, made everything just look super nice. Hot tank this bad boy. It is ready. As you can see, we basically cleaned up our block a little bit. I just basically used a rag with some brake clean, kind of cleaned the top surface off, and then used a flat sander with some 80 grit sandpaper and just very lightly. You're just trying to get a little bit of the surface cleaned up and ready for the head gasket. I also used some braking parts cleaner in the holes that the head bolts go into. So all the head bolt holes, the threads are all nice and clean. That just makes things a little bit easier for putting all that stuff together. So right now we're gonna get the head gasket on, and then we're gonna start the process of getting all the head bolts basically started and showing you guys the ARP head stud torquing sequence. We also installed this fleece. Basically it's a fuel filter delete kit. Right now everything's currently still loose. That way we can get our head in and get everything kind of positioned to how we want it. So we got the MOLLE head gasket kit. So one thing you want to make sure of is to line everything up to all the holes. If you have the right head gasket kit, all the holes will line up perfectly. And if you have the wrong head gasket kit, then nothing will line up. All right guys, so we basically got our cylinder head maybe 2 inches above the block. So now I'm basically going to position this cylinder head and have someone help me lower it down slowly to the head gasket and block, and then we will begin our ARP head stud install. So getting the head seated perfectly without compromising the head gasket is pretty critical. I ended up throwing in one of the head bolts before it sat down perfectly. That way it just made sure we were still lined up. And then basically there's 2 alignment dowels. You get those lined up and then it perfectly sits down, and then it can't move side to side, and you'll know if it's sitting in there properly. So now, since we were doing ARP head studs, the process, if you're just going back to the OEM head bolts, is obviously going to be different. On these ARP head studs, to note, there are 6 slightly longer studs. They are 6.625 inches long. These are the exhaust side of the head bolts, and then the shorter ones just go into everything. You can tell there's maybe about a 1/2 inch of difference there. And then obviously you have the coarse side of the threads, which goes into the block, and then the finer grade threads are what go towards the top, and they also have this Allen. We're not going to put any extra torque onto the head bolts because all the torquing happens with the ARP nut. Using that 8mm electric ratchet, I was able to put all of our ARP head studs all the way down. You can see how much further down they went. As soon as they stopped, I just stopped tightening them. Now we're gonna put our washers and nuts on. I take the ARP assembly lubricant and I put them on all the washers, and then I'll put all the washers on, and then I'll get a little bit on my fingers and then go through each individual stud, and then I also have them kind of in the nut too, just to kind of really make sure that they're all lubed up and ready to go. This is your torque sequence. This is the intake manifold side, and then this is the exhaust side. We are going to do these 3 steps in order, starting at 40 foot-pounds, 80 foot-pounds, and 125 foot-pounds is our final Titan sequence. So this is our rocker arm riser. I just call it the kind of the valve cover riser. If you do head studs, they want you to machine it out. You're basically just clearancing around just a little bit of this out. I just have this tool here with our aluminum bit. We're gonna kind of machine it down to follow this curvature right here. It's mainly just this riser part. And before you want to put this back into the engine, you want to make sure that all of the burrs have been perfectly cleaned out. So we got brand new push rods, just so they don't go in dry, as I like to set them in some oil. And then basically, pretty simple process. You just put these into their spot. I labeled our cart basically 1 through 6, and then this is left to right. So these bridges go on a certain way, basically left and right. So we're gonna put every single one of these back on first. I call them the bridges. The proper name for them are the cross heads. Then we're gonna put our pedestal and rocker arm assemblies all back together. So before we install our rocker arms, we're gonna install the injectors. Right now, I'm just gonna set all the injectors into the cylinder head, and then basically I'll show you guys that whole process. So basically we put on brand new crushed copper washers in our injectors. And then put them just kind of sitting into the hole. You want to make sure when you do this, there's a fuel line that goes through this hole. You want to make sure that that is obviously facing the right way. Once you get that kind of in there, push on it and you're going to hear it seat into the cylinder head, just like that. Pretty simple process. You got to make sure that they're seating. Also, as we put a little bit of clean engine oil on our O-ring, that will just ensure that the O-ring slides in and also doesn't get damaged. And just like that, we've seated all 6 injectors. So now we are going to install our fuel tubes. So our injectors are still loose. So you just take this tube, you put it into the head, and then kind of like the injectors, push on it till it makes a noise and seated. And then to tell that you're seated, if you move the injector back and forth, you'll see it wobbling a little bit. All we're going to do is just kind of finger tight everything, and then kind of do a preliminary tighten, and then basically go over and do the proper torque sequence. So we have gotten everything kind of seated and hand tightened. We're gonna do a preliminary torque sequence on our injector hold down bolts, I guess you could call them, to 5 Newton meters. Be alternating between the two of them, get those tight, and then we're gonna back it off. This just ensures that the injector's seated, and then once we do that, then we'll do another torque sequence on it.
1, 2, 3, let's go.
And now we're gonna basically back them off just a little bit and then start doing our final torque sequence for our injectors. All right, now that those are all torqued, we are going to get our fuel return line hooked up to the back of the head before we get any further, and make sure that we get that torqued properly. That'll just be easier to get to now rather than later. All right guys, so we're going to move on to the fuel rail banjo bolts and stuff like that. These are important to change. So we got that. We have one on our bolt right now. So I'm gonna play around with the back of the head and get this centered and started. And then I'm also going to move to our fleece distribution block and get that started. I'll probably only tighten up the back of the head for now. So we got the fuel return in the back of the cylinder head put in, and now we're going to start putting all of our rocker arms in. Basically we'll just get them started and then do the torque sequence for that next. We just used my little electric impact to make this process go faster. We are going to torque all our rocker arm bolts, they're these 10 millimeters, to 27 foot-pounds. All right guys, we did the new push rods and the valve springs. So we are going to reset our valve lash on all 6 cylinders. You're going to use a 5 millimeter Allen and a 14 millimeter wrench. Every vehicle has different specs. Ours is, the intake side is 6 thousandths to 15 thousandths. So what I usually do is set it right in between the middle. So we're going to set our intakes all at 10 thousandths. You're going to loosen up your Allen. You're going to stick your gauge between our bridge and our rocker, and we're gonna go until, not until it's super tight, but just enough to where it kind of is clamping it down a little bit, but enough to move it. Once we're there and we're happy with it, take our ratchet and we're gonna hold that right where it is and then just tighten up the nut. And we're gonna do this for all rockers. The way that you do that, as I kind of explained, is you put the engine to top dead center, and you will have cylinder number 1 intake valve. The valve spring will basically be lifted up if you have it correct. If not, then you got to spin the engine over 360 degrees, and then that will be, and then you can follow the intake and exhaust procedure as far as going to which cylinder, then flipping it over 360 degrees and then doing the other 3. We've gotten that all complete, so we are going to put our valve cover riser on and all of our valve cover components. We're going to torque these bolts to 18 foot-pounds, and you're going to want to start in the center and then work your way out. now we are putting on our valve cover gasket, which is also our injector wiring harness. And we're gonna get this nice and in place, and then get all of our connectors tightened. Now we can go ahead and put the valve covers back together. I don't have a torque wrench that goes down low enough to torque these, but I got them basically just snugged up a little bit. I used my electric ratchet, which isn't the best for it, but if you know how to control it and you can basically stop it as soon as it bottoms out, it's not going to harm anything. Are doing a new crankcase filter, and then this basically just sits in there. It just has a couple O-rings that you want to lube up before, and then now it's time for the top valve cover. The center part of our engine is basically 100% complete. Now we just got to focus on the driver's side and passenger side, getting all that stuff put together. We are going to put all of this side together now. So we're going to start with this plate that has our grid heater. This has all been cleaned and hot tanked. I ended up putting all the bolts kind of where they go, and you want to tighten this with your fuel rail as well. I have gotten our intake, I believe they call it the intake heater. I basically just hand tightened everything. Some of these fuel lines will get in the way, but this kind of ensures that everything is perfectly lined up. You can see this thing still moves around, so it's still loose. These things have a cone shape to them, and if they're not perfectly seated, you'll have a fuel leak. So getting these all lined up when everything can move around is kind of a good thing, and that's what I like to do. So now I'm going to tighten basically all of these bolts that hold our intake heater on to 18 foot-pounds. I was able to torque all of these bolts to 18 foot-pounds, no problem with the fuel lines. Now I'm probably going to take some of the fuel lines out, start getting these all tightened and torqued to spec, and I'll show you how we do that. If I only knew where my flashlight went. Oh, there it is. We have our cylinder head fitting, it's all the way in the back, and our fuel rail fitting. You're going to want to tighten those with a open end wrench to start. Once they're pretty snug down, then we're going to torque them. This is a open end wrench that has a 3/8 drive attachment. Set our torque wrench to 30 foot-pounds. I also tightened up our feed line from the CP3 up to the fuel rail. I need to still tighten this banjo bolt. We did that fleece delete kit, and I still have to tighten all that stuff up as well. So I'll get all that stuff tightened up, get the intake manifold put back on, and basically get everything connected, then start going over to this side. So now that all these bolts for our intake manifold are tight, I'm going to move on to tightening this intercooler clamp, and then also plugging in our sensors that go to our, I believe this is the mass airflow sensor, Could be wrong, but we're gonna plug all the sensors back together. And this side is basically complete. We put our bolt that holds our dipstick on, and then we also put our bolt that holds our transmission dipstick on. We obviously still need our radiator hose, but I think I'm gonna start working on the turbo and manifold on this side. So for now, this is finished. If everything goes in smoothly, then I will probably end up finishing this entire thing tonight. So stay tuned and let's get into this side. So we're taking a quick break. If you guys support our channel during this virus, we're starting to get slowed down in the shop, so this would help us greatly. We're gonna run a sale on all our merch. So we got our camo hats, gray hats, black and gold hats, our burnout t-shirts. We're stocked up on a bunch of stuff. So if you guys are interested in getting this stuff, we're gonna have a promo code COVID-19 and get yourself 19% off all of our merch. Also, we are a brand ambassador for Rockform phone cases, and if you use the code HIGHALTITUDE25, all the links will be in the description. Get yourself a phone case. This stuff helps us out, guys. So thank you so much for supporting the channel, and back to the video. It is time to put our turbo and exhaust manifold back on. I remove this with the cylinder head, and then I install it separately. You can either mount the exhaust manifold and then put the turbo on, or you can do them both together. So it's time to put this in and get all that stuff going. I just have them started on a couple studs. Now we're gonna start putting all of our other manifold bolts and our new gaskets in, and then we will torque all these to spec and then start working on our plumbing. Alright guys, so as you can see, all of our exhaust manifold bolts are in. Now I'm gonna torque these all to spec, and everything went in nice and smoothly, and all of our gaskets are in there. Have almost completed our install of our cylinder head. I just wanted to get a couple banjo bolts that go on to the fitting for the coolant feed on top of the turbo. So I'm waiting on the banjo bolt washers. Other than that, we got all this stuff back together. This stuff's all pretty self-explanatory. If you guys do need any help, just drop a comment. We got the oil changed on it. We're gonna put coolant in it, start this engine, get it in a good heat cycle, and basically go from there and get this thing back on the road. So that is it on the Cummins head gasket job. It's pretty simple as far as getting the turbo in, getting all your lines hooked back up, your intake hooked back up. You obviously want to make sure that all your fluids are topped off, and obviously everything is operating at the proper temperature. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you did like it, give it a thumbs up. Drop a comment if you guys have any questions. Make sure to smash the subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next video.